Hi everybody, my name is Omar and I am going to be teaching you AS and A-level psychology. Now, my writing is not all that good, but please bear with me. So, a little about me. I am a psychology fanatic. I enjoy psychology, and the reason that I decided to create these videos is I noticed there is not a whole lot of resources around for CAIE, Cambridge International Psychology, so I thought it would be a good idea to basically go ahead and create such resources. So I am going to be covering all of AS and A-level psychology for you guys, and I'll make sure that it is according to CAIE. I will try and post regular videos about each and everything, and I'll make sure to create a structured program for psychology for us, so that way we can really just go ahead and dive into different material and just, take it to them. Okay, so from what I know and from what I've researched, your syllabus is divided into two main parts. Let me just write those down for you. Part number 1, methodology. Part number 2, approaches. Again, excuse my writing. Okay, so for methodology, the first thing that would come into our mind when we say methodology, it is naturally going to be, for me, I'm just going to think of research methods. Because you see, psychology is not something that we just come up with, right? It is, I would say, it is something that we do through experiments and research on, following ethical guidelines to make sure that nothing is biased or hidden. You know what I mean. So that would be your number 1. Number 2, and then after that you would have your issues and debates. So that is your methodology, excuse me. And by the way, this is also known as 4 psychological approaches. So for today, I'm going to outline everything for you and give you a brief introduction into everything. Just a brief one to get your mind started on something, right? Okay, so the first one that we have is your biological approach. See, the emotions that we have, the influence of genes, hormones, and a lot of different stuff that's been going on in our brain, right? It can all be explained through biological approach, right? So for example, let's say there's a day where you're feeling relatively angry today, right? And then you think about it, you're like, okay, you sit down at the end of the day, you're like, I was very angry today. Why was it? Why was that, right? So was it my hormones? Was it a hormonal imbalance somewhere? What was I thinking? It could have been that you may have been triggered by something that day, or maybe you just woke up that day and you just felt angry, right? I mean, it doesn't happen as inconsistently, or like it doesn't fluctuate as much. But especially during puberty times, you would notice, right? You have different hormonals going on, rushes going on. You're like, oh my God, what the hell? So that's your biological approach, because it also affects your mind. It also affects how you take in emotions or you reflect them, right? Then you have number two. Number two is going to be your cognitive approach. Now, you see, the easiest way to explain cognition that is not mentioned in most sources for A levels nowadays would be critical thinking. It's your language, your memory, right? Your how you deal with your common sense in some aspects, what I would say can be explained by cognitive approach. And your number third is going to be the social approach. You see how your brain works with society and how it interacts with a whole bunch of different stuff, right? So that's where you come in the social approach. Then you have your number four, the learning approach. The learning approach is really interesting because in the learning approach you kind of learn, you're like, okay, let's take a step back, let's think about it. And you're like, okay, so whatever you learn is more so a like different cycles and routines of conditioning. You're like, okay, I've been conditioned this way, that's how I learn it, right? For example, I don't know if you know this famous example. If I say a dog's name and I keep giving it a treat, that's the most basic way to teach a dog its name. You are conditioning it. You say its name, you give it a treat. You say its name, you give it a treat, right? The next time, like after a bunch of cycles, when you say its name, it is going to respond to that name, but it's been conditioned to respond to that name, right? What's the condition over here? It's like it thinks, it's like, oh, that my name's been called, maybe I'll get a treat, right? So these are your four different approaches, and that would be biological, cognitive, social, and learning approach. Okay, let me move back to methodology over here. Sorry, I always stuck on it. Okay, so you have your research methods. Your research methods are gonna just give you an outline of how we basically conduct research in different aspects of psychology and what kind of research are there, what are the small aspects of research. Then you have your ethical guidelines, which are gonna be the rules that you abide by. And then you have your issues and debates, which are basically just how people disagree over some stuff and agree over some stuff, which will always be there because we're humans. We're gonna agree and disagree on different stuff, right? Anyway, okay, so naturally we're gonna start with our first topic, which is gonna be research methods. Okay, so with research methods, my first topic I'm going to discuss with you guys is an experiment. So you can find like the exact definition in your course book or textbook, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and explain that definition to you. I'm going to try and really help you understand that concept of what it is, right? So if we're starting with experiment. Okay, so what is an experiment? I would say an experiment is basically trying to understand the cause and no, let me fix that arrow. Effect cycle. So what is the cause and effect cycle? Let's say you boil water, right? You turn on the stove and consider the pot is already filled with water and sitting on the stove. You turn the stove on, you give the pot some heat, right? And due to the heat, the water starts boiling. So what would you say is the cause and effect over here? There can be a number of different causes in this, right? One of it can be turning on stove, right? Or heat, if you want to be more precise. What would the effect be? The effect is going to be boiling water. Now, from getting from this point to this point, the study of that nature is experiment. You're trying to find a relationship between two different variables, right? And I say cause and effect to make it easier for you, right? But if you change, let's say, the word cause into IV, which in its full form is independent variable, and effect to DV, which is going to be a dependent variable. Now you have that cycle. You're trying to see what the independent variable, basically the cause of how and what, or if it actually does affects dependent variable, right? So let's come up with more examples. Let's say, so let's say, do treats positively affect a child's mood? What would you say is the independent variable over here? What would you say is the dependent variable over here? Right? Feel free to pause the video, take your time, and try and understand. Okay, so I would say treats over here would be the independent variable, and child's mood over here would be the dependent variable. Right? So, the studying of this is called an experiment, and this could be any kind of study, right? It could be trying to form a relationship that, if it actually exists, like, do actually treats improve the child's mood? And it could also be, seeing like to what extent they improve a child's mood, right? Like, it could be anything at all. That is your experiment, basically. And so, for example, if I put this into words, do treats positively affect a child's mood. This is what we would call, in the science world, a hypothesis. Okay, so now you studied experiments, right? Now there's 3 types of experiment. Number 1, laboratory experiment. Oh, let me fix that for a minute, sorry. Number 1, you see, a laboratory experiment is an experiment where you are trying to make sure that the independent variable is the only thing that affects the dependent variable. So, for example, a laboratory experiment takes place more in medical fields where like you're trying to find out, does a particular medicine, this is just an example, it could be many more applications, positively affect heart health. So you would need a good laboratory setup for this, where you're like, okay, let's see, is it actually improving stuff? Because let's say, for example, if it wasn't a laboratory effects, there's so many different things that could involve good heart health. That would be your diet, exercise, right, routine. So you do a laboratory experiment to basically eliminate other variables, right? Keep that in mind. Okay, then you move more so towards a field experiment. So in a field experiment, everything is related to the laboratory experiment is pretty much the same, right? Same. But, and this is a big but, the control over the variables is not that extreme. So, for example, let's take back the example of the treats and the mood of kids, right? You're like, okay, what are the other variables that affect them? So you'll say those would be toys, anything that makes kids happy. You're like, okay, so what's going on over here? You're like, well, that's okay, if as long as you can limit these variables, you don't have to totally eliminate them. As long as you can limit them, you should be fine, and you should get a good decent amount of an idea. And if I put this in a real life perspective, so for example, a scientist is trying to study this hypothesis, right? So what does he do? He is not going to completely restrict the kids, right? Because what the hell, they're kids, right? You can't restrict the kids at all. So he's going to sit down, he's going to make sure that there are more treats as compared to the toys, right? In a field experiment, he's going to go out to a park or somewhere, or to a daycare. He's going to be like, okay, I'll make sure there's more treats than toys, and he's going to study them over there, right? This is a loose explanation. When you read your book, you're going to really try and grasp into that knowledge, but what I'm telling you is what's going to help you to basically identify what the book says and try and understand into a layman's terms, you see. Okay, so, and then you have your natural experiment. So in a natural experiment, I'll have to just say, like, the researchers, right, they're not so much concerned about other variables. They just go out there and they identify all the different sort of, excuse me, so they identify all the different sort of variables involved, and they study them in a natural environment, right? So this could be very different examples. This could be a public park, a public restaurant, it could be a public gym. They just sit there and most of the time they just observe. There's a lot of observation in a natural experiment. Okay, so in our next class we're gonna pick off from this, but I think for today this is enough for now. I will see you all in the next class. Have a good day.